Ever settled into that expensive first-class seat, ready to relax, only to be targeted, humiliated, and publicly ejected? For 17-year-old Jamal, his dream trip turned into a nightmare. He was black, he was young, and a flight attendant decided he didn't belong. But she picked the wrong kid and the wrong dad. When his father made one phone call, the entire aircraft, ready for takeoff at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, was grounded. Buckle up, because this isn't just a story of injustice. It's a story of power, prejudice, and karma hitting back hard. You won't believe the twists that followed. The scent of recycled air and expensive leather usually filled Jamal Washington with a thrill. At 17, this was his third time flying first class, a perk of his father's demanding job and the resulting air miles. This trip, however, was special. He was heading from Atlanta to San Francisco for a prestigious summer coding camp, a significant step towards his MIT dream. His dad, David Washington, a man whose quiet demeanor often masked a will of iron, had seen him off at the gate. A rare smile of pride crinkling the corners of his eyes. Jamal found his seat 1A, a window seat just as he liked. He stowed his carry-on, a sleek backpack containing his laptop and a collection of graphic novels, in the overhead bin. He was dressed neatly. Dark jeans, a fresh Kendrick Lamar concert tee under a stylish but understated bomber jacket, and clean sneakers. He looked like any other teenager, perhaps a bit more put together than some, but blending in was usually his style. He settled into the plush seat, the cabin around him sparsely populated for now. A few businessmen were already engrossed in their laptops. A woman with a Hermes scarf was delicately sipping water, and an older couple were quietly chatting. Jamal pulled out his noise-cancelling headphones and his latest sci-fi novel, Project Hail Mary, ready to lose himself in another world before his own adventure began. That's when he first encountered Brenda. Flight attendant Brenda Hoskins was in her late 40s, with a tightly pulled blonde bun that seemed to accentuate the perpetual frown lines etched between her brows. She'd been flying for over 20 years, and in her mind, she'd seen it all and knew it all. As she moved through the first-class cabin, her eyes like heat-seeking missiles locked onto Jamal. He was young. He was black. He was in 1A. Her internal calculus honed by years of what she considered experience, but what was in reality a tapestry of ingrained biases immediately flagged him as an anomaly. "Can I help you, young man?" Her voice wasn't overtly hostile, not yet, but it was laden with a saccharine condescension that prickled Jamal's skin. Jamal looked up, offering a polite smile. "No, thank you, I'm all settled." Brenda's eyes flicked down to his book, then back to his face. "This is a first-class cabin, you know." Jamal's smile tightened. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 1A." He gestured vaguely towards his boarding pass, which he'd tucked into the seat pocket. "I'll need to see your boarding pass," she stated, her tone hardening, losing the sugary veneer. Other passengers were starting to notice the interaction. The businessman across the aisle paused his typing. Jamal felt a familiar warmth creep up his neck. He'd faced this before. The subtle questioning, the implication that he didn't belong in spaces where his presence challenged someone's preconceived notions. He reached into the seat pocket and handed her the pass. Brenda scrutinized it, turning it over as if expecting the ink to smudge and reveal a forgery. "This says Washington," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, that's me. Jamal Washington." "And you're in what?" "Yes," Jamal repeated, his patience wearing thin. He just wanted to read his book. Brenda handed the pass back. Her lips pursed. "Well, make sure your belongings are properly stowed. We don't want anything falling out during takeoff." She gave his backpack in the overhead bin a pointed look, even though it was perfectly secure. Jamal nodded, saying nothing, and tried to return to his book. But the encounter had left a bitter taste. He could feel Brenda's eyes on him as she continued her cabin checks, a lingering scrutiny that made him deeply uncomfortable. The boarding process continued. More passengers filed in, filling the remaining first-class seats and the economy cabin beyond. The captain made his welcome announcement, and the cabin crew began their safety demonstration. Jamal tried to focus to shake off the unease, but Brenda seemed to make it a point to find fault. She adjusted his already buckled seatbelt, reminded him to keep his tray table stowed, even though he hadn't touched it, and offered him a child's activity pack with a smirk, which he politely declined. Each interaction was a small paper cut designed to undermine and belittle. The final straw came as the plane was about to push back from the gate. Brenda approached him again this time, with a gate agent, a harried-looking man named Mark, in tow. "Sir." Brenda began, her voice now carrying a note of feigned concern, mixed with triumph. "I'm afraid there seems to be a discrepancy with your seat. Mr. Henderson here from Gate Operations needs to verify a few things." Jamal was bewildered. "A discrepancy? I just showed you my boarding pass. It's correct." Mark, clearly flustered, and likely just taking Brenda's word, looked at Jamal with an apologetic but firm expression. "Sir, we have a report that this seat might be double-booked or there's some confusion. If you could just come with me to the gate, we can sort this out quickly." "Sort it out?" "We're about to take off," Jamal protested, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to remain calm. Heads were turning. The woman with the Hermes scarf was openly staring. "That's why we need to be quick," Brenda chimed in, her expression now one of smug officiousness. "We can't hold up the entire flight for one passenger's seating issue." The implication was clear. He was the problem. He was holding things up. "But there is no issue," Jamal insisted, his frustration mounting. "This is my seat. I paid for it. My dad—" "Sir, please," Mark interrupted, his voice firmer now. "We don't want to cause a scene. Just come with me." "'Cause a scene? You're the ones causing a scene," Jamal exclaimed, finally losing his cool. He felt trapped, humiliated. He knew deep down this wasn't about a double booking. This was about Brenda not wanting him there. "If you don't cooperate, sir," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper, "we'll have to have you removed for being a disruptive passenger." The threat hung heavy in the air. Jamal looked around. No one met his eye. He felt utterly alone. His dream trip, his coding camp, all of it, felt like it was slipping away, tainted by this ugly, unwarranted confrontation. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with anger and shame. He unbuckled his seatbelt, his hands trembling slightly. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break down, but the injustice burned. As he stood up to follow Mark, Brenda allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smirk. He was being kicked out of first class, in front of everyone. The walk from seat 1A to the airplane door felt like a mile-long gauntlet of shame. Jamal could feel the stares of the other first-class passengers, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and perhaps in some, a silent judgment that he must have done something to deserve this. Brenda Hoskins trailed behind him, and Mark like a prison guard, her presence a constant, smug reminder of her victory. Once in the jet bridge away from the prying eyes of the passengers, Mark's demeanor softened slightly. "Look, son," he began. "I'm sure this is just a mix-up. Let's go to the desk and we'll see what's going on." Jamal wasn't listening. The anger and humiliation were churning inside him, a toxic brew. He pulled out his phone. "Who are you calling?" Mark asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "My dad," Jamal said, his voice flat. He dialed. It rang twice before David Washington answered, his voice calm and professional. "Jamal, everything all right, son? You should be taking off soon." "Dad." Jamal's voice cracked, the emotion finally overwhelming him. They kicked me out of my seat. They kicked me off the plane." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. David Washington was a partner at one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms, specializing in corporate litigation and civil rights cases. He was a man accustomed to dealing with high-stakes conflicts, but the thought of his son, his bright, ambitious boy, being subjected to such treatment sent a jolt of cold fury through him. "What?" explained Jamal, slowly. "Where are you now?" David's voice was still quiet, but it now had an edge of tempered steel. Jamal recounted the story, his voice thick with emotion. Brenda's initial suspicion, the constant harassment, the accusation of a discrepancy, and the public removal. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside him, overhearing Jamal's side of the conversation. Brenda, who had followed them to the gate desk, stood with her arms crossed, looking impatient. When Jamal finished, David asked, "What is the name of the flight attendant, Jamal?" "Brenda Hoskins, I think she said." "And the airline?" "Global Wings Flight 712 to San Francisco." "And you are at the gate desk now, at Hartsfield-Jackson?" "Yes, Dad." "Okay, son." David said, his voice a reassuring balm. "Listen to me. I want you to stay calm. Do not get agitated. Do not say anything more to them for now. Just hand the phone to the gate agent, Mr. Henderson." "You said Mark Dad. His name is Mark Henderson," Jamal corrected, though he'd initially misremembered Henderson as the one escorting him. The gate agent who came to the plane was Mark, but Jamal had been so flustered he likely mixed up names when first mentioning him. He passed the phone to Mark. "My dad wants to speak to you." Mark took the phone hesitantly. "Hello, this is Mark Henderson, gate supervisor for Global Wings." David Washington's voice, amplified slightly by the phone, was no longer just calm. It was Bing Leng Di, authoritative. "Mr. Henderson, my name is David Washington. I am Jamal Washington's father. I am also a senior partner at Washington Finley & Associates, and more pertinent to this situation, I am legal counsel for several aviation oversight committees and a member of the Frequent Flyer Advisory Board for your airline's parent company. My son, a 17-year-old minor, has just been wrongfully removed from Flight 712 from a first-class seat 1A. That was fully paid for and confirmed. I understand flight attendant Brenda Hoskins instigated this removal based on what appears to be profiling and harassment." Mark's face visibly paled. He shot a nervous glance at Brenda, whose smugness was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of unease. David continued, his voice a relentless, controlled current. "I want you to understand the gravity of this situation. My son has been humiliated and discriminated against. Unless this is rectified immediately, and I mean immediately, I will be initiating a series of actions that will make Global Wings wish it had never heard the name Washington. First, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit citing racial discrimination, defamation, and infliction of emotional distress. Second, I will be contacting every media outlet I know, and believe me, Mr. Henderson, I know many. This story of a black teenager being unceremoniously kicked out of first class by your airline will be headline news by morning. Third, I will personally see to it that the Department of Transportation launches a full investigation into Global Wings' discriminatory practices. Your airline's reputation will be in tatters." Mark was sweating now. "Mr. Washington, I assure you we are just trying to sort out a potential seating issue. There is no seating issue, Mr. Henderson, and you know it." David cut him off. "This is an issue of prejudice. Now here is what is going to happen. You are going to escort my son back onto that aircraft. He will be reseated in 1A. Ms. Hoskins will offer him a sincere personal apology in front of the other first-class passengers. If she is incapable of that, she will be removed from the flight crew for this flight. Furthermore, that aircraft is not to move 1 inch from that gate until my son is back in his seat, and I have spoken to him to confirm he has been treated with the respect he deserves." "But sir, the flight is already delayed. We can't just hold a plane," Mark stammered. "You can and you will." David stated his voice, leaving no room for argument. "All the consequences I've outlined will begin to unfold within the next 10 minutes. I am 5 minutes from your terminal. I will be there shortly to oversee this personally. Do I make myself clear?" Mark, looking like he'd seen a ghost, mumbled, "Yes, Mr. Washington, crystal clear." "Good. Put my son back on the phone." Mark handed the phone back to Jamal, his hand trembling slightly. "Jamal," David said, his voice warm again. "Stay put. I'm on my way. And don't worry. We'll sort this out." Jamal nodded, a wave of relief washing over him quickly, followed by a renewed sense of anger at what he'd been put through. He looked at Mark, then at Brenda. Brenda's face was now a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. The gate phone rang shrilly. Another agent answered. It listened intently, her eyes widening, then looked at Mark. "Mark, that was operations. They said to hold Flight 712 at the gate, indefinitely, on the orders of someone very high up in legal." Brenda gasped. Mark just stared at Jamal, then at the phone in Jamal's hand, as if it were a viper. The plane was grounded, all because of one phone call, all because they messed with the wrong teenager and the wrong father. The drama was only just beginning. The atmosphere in Gate C-33 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport had gone from routine pre-flight bustle to a thick, anxious stillness. Passengers on Flight 712 to San Francisco were growing restless. The initial announcement of a minor operational delay had stretched past the 20-minute mark, and whispers were starting to circulate. Why weren't they pushing back? In the jet bridge, the tension was a palpable entity. Mark Henderson was frantically speaking into his radio, his voice hushed but urgent. Brenda Hoskins stood frozen. Her earlier arrogance completely deflated, replaced by a sickly green pallor. Jamal, still holding his phone, watched them, a strange mix of vindication and weariness settling over him. He hadn't asked for this drama, but now that it was here, he felt a grim satisfaction that the injustice wasn't being swept under the rug. Within minutes, as promised, David Washington arrived. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his early 50s, his expression composed but radiating an intensity that made people take notice. He wasn't loud or ostentatious, but he possessed an aura of quiet authority that could silence a room. He embraced Jamal briefly, a hand on his shoulder, conveying silent support. "Mr. Henderson." David addressed Mark, his voice calm but firm. Mark practically jumped. "Mr. Washington." "Yes, sir." We've held the plane." "Good," David said. "Now let's discuss Flight Attendant Hoskins." He turned his gaze to Brenda, who flinched as if struck. "Ms. Hoskins, my son tells me you initiated his removal from a seat he was rightfully occupying after subjecting him to a series of demeaning interactions. Is this true?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked to Mark for support, but he avoided her gaze, suddenly very interested in a spot on the carpet. I thought there was a mistake with the seating chart. Brenda finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He seemed out of place. The admission, however veiled, hung in the air. Out of place, David repeated, his eyebrows arching. And what precisely made a young black man in a first-class seat seem out of place to you? Ms. Hoskins, was it his age, his race, his attire, or was it simply your own internal biases making that determination for you? Brenda paled further, unable to respond. David didn't wait for an answer. My son will be returning to his seat. You will apologize to him, and then I will decide if your presence on this flight is acceptable. Just then, another figure hurried down the jet bridge. A woman in a Global Wings uniform, clearly a more senior manager. This was Carol Baxter, the airline's station manager for Hartsfield-Jackson. Her face was creased with worry. Mr. Washington, she addressed David directly, extending a hand. I'm Carol Baxter, station manager. I came as soon as I heard. I am so incredibly sorry for what your son has experienced. This is not how Global Wings operates. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. David shook her hand briefly. Ms. Baxter, a misunderstanding is when a coffee order is wrong. This is profiling and discrimination. My son was publicly humiliated and removed from a flight he was ticketed for. That's not a misunderstanding. That's an outrage. I understand your anger, sir, completely, Carol said, trying to maintain a placating tone. We are taking this very seriously. Flight attendant Hoskins will be debriefed and appropriate action will be taken. Of course, Jamal is welcome back on the flight. We can even offer an upgrade, though he's already in 1A. David cut her off. An upgrade isn't the issue. The issue is accountability. My son will return to 1A. Ms. Hoskins will apologize. On board. In front of the other passengers who witnessed her actions. Carol looked hesitant. Mr. Washington, a public apology like that. It could be very disruptive. Disruptive? David's voice rose a notch, the calm beginning to fray. My son's forcible and unwarranted removal was disruptive. The grounding of this aircraft is disruptive. An apology is the least disruptive way to begin rectifying this. Or would you prefer we escalate this further? I have a press release drafted, Ms. Baxter. It details Global Wings' commitment to diversity juxtaposed with today's events. It's quite compelling. Carol Baxter's face tightened. She knew David Washington wasn't bluffing. The potential PR nightmare was immense. A grounded, plain accusations of racism, a powerful lawyer father. It was a perfect storm. All right, Mr. Washington, Carol conceded, though her expression was pained. Jamal will be escorted back to his seat. Ms. Hoskins will apologize. Mark, please ensure this happens. Mark nodded numbly. David then turned his attention back to the plane. One more thing, Ms. Baxter. I want to speak to the captain. Now. On board Flight 712. Captain Eva Rostova was a seasoned pilot with over 30 years of experience. She had been informed of a security issue involving a passenger that had led to the gate return and subsequent indefinite hold. She was not pleased. Delays cost money, messed with schedules, and frayed passenger nerves. When her first officer informed her that the station manager and the father of the removed passenger were requesting to speak with her, she braced herself. David Washington and Carol Baxter entered the cockpit. Jamal remained in the jet bridge, wanting to be as far from Brenda as possible until necessary. Captain Rostova, David began. My son was removed from your aircraft by one of your flight attendants under false pretenses. It appears to be a clear case of racial bias. Captain Rostova listened intently as David succinctly explained the situation. Unlike Brenda, the captain was a pragmatic and fair-minded individual. She'd encountered biased crew members before and had little tolerance for it. "Mr. Washington," Captain Rostova said, her voice crisp and professional. "I am the commander of this aircraft, and I am responsible for everyone on board. If what you say is accurate and one of my crew has behaved in such a manner, it is unacceptable. I will not tolerate discrimination on my flight. Period." She looked at Carol Baxter. "Carol, what is being done?" "Flight Attendant Hoskins will be apologizing to Mr. Washington's son, and he will be reseated," Carol said. "Apologizing is a start," Captain Rostova said, her eyes narrowing. "But her judgment is now seriously in question. I'm not sure I'm comfortable having her work this flight if she's capable of this kind of behavior. It compromises the safety and well-being of passengers." This was a new development. Brenda, overhearing this from the galley where she'd retreated, felt a fresh wave of panic. Losing her job over this David Washington, nodded approvingly at the captain. "Your concern is noted and appreciated, Captain." Carol Baxter looked increasingly stressed. Removing a flight attendant last minute was a logistical nightmare. It could mean further delays, even cancellation, if a replacement couldn't be found quickly. "Perhaps," David interjected smoothly, "we see how sincere Ms. Hoskins' apology is. And then, Captain, you can make your final determination. My priority is my son's well-being and dignity." Captain Rostova considered this. "Fair enough. Let's get your son back on board and address Ms. Hoskins." The decision was made. Jamal, escorted by his father and a still-shaken Mark Henderson, walked back onto Flight 712. The eyes of every first-class passenger were on them. The silence was thick with unspoken questions and anticipation. Jamal walked back to 1A. His head held high this time, though his heart was pounding. As Jamal approached Seat 1A, he saw that his backpack was still in the overhead bin, and his book lay on the seat exactly as he'd left them. It was a small thing, but it felt like a silent testament to his rightful place. He sat down, his father standing beside him, a protective and imposing presence. Carol Baxter and Captain Rostova stood near the front of the cabin, their expressions serious. All eyes were now on Brenda Hoskins, who was reluctantly being nudged forward by Mark Henderson from the galley. She looked like she was walking to her own execution. Her face was pale, her eyes darted nervously around the cabin, avoiding contact with anyone, especially Jamal and his father. "Ms. Hoskins," Captain Rostova's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. "You have something to say to Mr. Jamal Washington." Brenda shuffled her feet. She swallowed hard. The other passengers leaned in unashamedly, eavesdropping. This was better than any in-flight movie. "Mr. Washington." Brenda began, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to her earlier arrogance. I apologize for the misunderstanding about the seat." Jamal stared at her, his expression unreadable. David Washington's arms were crossed, his gaze unwavering and unimpressed. "Is that it, Ms. Hoskins?" David asked, his voice dangerously soft. "A misunderstanding. You humiliated my son. You had him forcibly removed from this aircraft. You implied he was a liar and a troublemaker. And all you can offer is an apology for a misunderstanding." Brenda flinched. I made a mistake," she mumbled, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry for the distress it caused." It was a weak apology delivered without eye contact, and reeking of someone forced into it rather than someone genuinely contrite. Captain Rostova stepped forward. Ms. Hoskins, look at Mr. Washington when you apologize to him." Brenda reluctantly lifted her gaze to meet Jamal's. For the first time, Jamal saw not just malice or arrogance in her eyes, but fear, deep personal fear. "Jamal," she said his name sounding foreign on her lips. "I am truly sorry for how I treated you. It was unprofessional and wrong. I misjudged the situation. I apologize." It was better, but still lacked the ring of true remorse. David Washington, however, seemed to sense that pushing for more from Brenda herself at this moment might be counterproductive. The real accountability would come later. "Thank you," Jamal said quietly, simply wanting the ordeal to be over. "Captain Rostova," David said, turning to the pilot, "my son has his apology such as it is. I trust Global Wings will conduct a thorough internal review of Ms. Hoskins' conduct and the systemic issues that allowed this to happen." "You have my word, Mr. Washington," Captain Rostova affirmed. "This will be investigated fully." She then addressed Brenda directly. "Ms. Hoskins, given the profound lack of judgment you've displayed, I am not comfortable with you continuing as part of the crew for this flight. Your actions have compromised the trust necessary between crew and passengers. You will disembark with Ms. Baxter. We will arrange for a replacement." Brenda gasped audibly. This was it, the immediate consequence. Her career, her reputation, crumbling before her eyes in front of a cabin full of witnesses. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of self-pity and terror. She looked pleadingly at Carol Baxter, but the station manager just gave a curt, almost imperceptible shake of her head. The decision was made. As a stunned Brenda was escorted off the plane by Carol Baxter, a ripple of murmurs went through the first-class cabin. The businessman who had paused his typing earlier caught Jamal's eye and gave a small, approving nod. The woman with the Hermes scarf, however, sniffed dismissively, as if the entire delay was an imposition on her valuable time, regardless of the cause. With Brenda gone, a palpable sense of relief settled over Jamal. His father squeezed his shoulder. "You okay, son?" Jamal nodded. "Yeah, Dad. Thanks." "Always," David said quietly. The delay, however, was not quite over. Finding a replacement flight attendant at short notice for a transcontinental flight was no easy task. As airline staff scrambled, David Washington received a call on his cell phone. He listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Thank you for the information," he said into the phone. "That's very illuminating. Please forward me the documentation." He hung up, a thoughtful, almost predatory look in his eyes. "What is it, Dad?" Jamal asked. David looked at his son, then around the cabin. "It seems, son, that our Miss Hoskins has a history. That was a contact I have within the Flight Attendants Union. Someone who heard about the grounding, and Brenda's name reached out. This isn't the first time she's been accused of discriminatory behavior or abusing her authority with passengers, particularly passengers of color." A new twist. This wasn't an isolated incident of a bad day or a single misjudgment. This was a pattern. "Apparently," David continued, his voice low, "there have been at least 3 prior formal complaints filed against her for similar behavior. 2 were dismissed by Global Wings management as unsubstantiated after cursory investigations. The 3rd resulted in a written warning and mandatory sensitivity training, which clearly had little effect." Jamal felt a chill. So the airline knew. They knew Brenda was a problem, and they had effectively enabled her behavior by not taking decisive action sooner. This wasn't just about one rogue flight attendant anymore. This was about systemic failure. "This changes things, Dad, doesn't it?" Jamal asked. David's lips curved into a grim smile. "Oh, absolutely, son. This changes everything. This isn't just about an apology anymore. This is about exposing a pattern and practice and ensuring Global Wings takes genuine, verifiable steps to prevent this from ever happening again. The karma Ms. Hoskins is facing is just the beginning. The airline itself now has a much bigger problem." The delay for Flight 712 was no longer just about finding a replacement crew member. It was about to become a crucible for an airline's corporate responsibility and a flight attendant's reckoning. The initial drama had concluded, but the true fallout, the hard karma, was only just beginning to gather momentum. The news of Brenda Hoskins's history of complaints spread like wildfire amongst the Global Wings staff at Hartsfield-Jackson. What started as a contained incident was rapidly escalating into a full-blown crisis for the airline. David Washington, armed with the information from his union contact, made it clear to Carol Baxter, who had returned to the gate area, looking even more stressed after disembarking with Brenda, that a simple apology and removing Brenda from one flight was no longer sufficient. "Ms. Baxter," David stated in the now crowded gate area, where other airline executives had started to gather, "Global Wings has knowingly harbored an employee with a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior. Your airline is culpable. This isn't just about my son anymore. It's about every passenger who has been or could be subjected to this kind of treatment." Brenda Hoskins, meanwhile, was having a complete meltdown in a back office. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. Being pulled from a flight was bad enough, but with her history now being brought to light by someone as formidable as David Washington, her entire career was on the line. The tears were no longer just of self-pity, but of genuine terror. Her union representative had been called, but even he looked grim when he heard the details and who was involved. On board Flight 712, Captain Rostova had managed to secure a replacement flight attendant, a young, eager man named Alex, who had been on reserve. He was briefed quickly and joined the remaining first-class attendant, a seasoned professional named Maria, who had witnessed Brenda's behavior with quiet disapproval and had already subtly tried to make Jamal feel more comfortable after the initial harassment. The flight was now delayed by over 2 hours. Passengers in economy were getting irate, their complaints growing louder. The first-class passengers, having witnessed the drama unfold, were a mix of sympathetic, annoyed, and grimly fascinated. David Washington excused himself from the gate area discussions and reboarded the plane to sit with Jamal until takeoff. "They're in full damage control mode out there," he told Jamal quietly. "They know they've messed up not just today, but by ignoring Brenda's past behavior." "So what happens to her now?" Jamal asked. "She'll face a disciplinary hearing, that's for sure," David said. "With her record and this incident being so high-profile, termination is highly likely, and frankly deserved. People like her, who abuse their positions of minor authority to demean others based on prejudice, have no place in customer service, especially not at 30,000 feet. The hard karma for Brenda was indeed beginning to bite. Within 24 hours, she was officially suspended, pending a full investigation. The evidence was overwhelming Jamal's testimony. David Washington's legal pressure, Captain Rostova's damning report on her lack of judgment, Maria's corroborating statement about Brenda's aggressive attitude towards Jamal from the outset, and now the resurrected files of previous complaints. The investigation was swift. Global Wings, under immense pressure and facing the threat of a massive lawsuit and a PR disaster, knew they had to act decisively. Brenda Hoskins was summoned to a formal hearing a week later. She tried to defend herself, claiming she was stressed, that she genuinely thought there was a seating issue, that Jamal had been uncooperative, a claim easily refuted by Jamal's calm demeanor during most of the incident, which other passengers confirmed. But her defense crumbled when confronted with her documented history. The union rep could do little more than ensure procedure was followed. The airline's lawyers advised management that keeping her employed was an unacceptable liability. 2 weeks after Flight 712 finally belatedly made its journey to San Francisco, Brenda Hoskins received a certified letter. Her employment with Global Wings was terminated effective immediately. The reasons cited were gross misconduct, repeated violations of company policy regarding passenger treatment, and discriminatory behavior. The news hit Brenda like a physical blow. 22 years with the airline gone. Her pension, her flight benefits, her identity, all stripped away. She tried to appeal, but the decision was final. The friendly skies had become decidedly unfriendly for her. The karma, however, didn't stop there. Word travels fast in the airline industry. Branded as a problematic employee with a history of racial bias, finding another flight attendant job proved impossible. Other airlines wouldn't touch her. She had to sell her condo, downsize her life significantly, and ended up taking a job as a cashier at a discount supermarket, a world away from the perceived glamour of international travel. The perpetual frown lines on her face deepened, etched now not by authority, but by bitterness and regret. She had become invisible, a nobody, the very thing she had tried to make Jamal feel. For Mark Henderson, the gate agent, the consequences were less severe, but still impactful. He received a formal reprimand for failing to de-escalate the situation, and for too readily accepting Brenda's assessment without proper verification. He was sent for retraining, and his prospects for promotion were significantly stalled. He learned a hard lesson about blindly following a colleague's biased lead. While Brenda Hoskins was facing her personal reckoning, Global Wings was battling a public relations inferno. Despite their attempts to keep the incident quiet, it was too juicy, too flagrant to remain contained. Another first-class passenger, a tech blogger with a modest following, had discreetly filmed parts of the confrontation and Brenda's pathetic apology. Once the plane landed in San Francisco, he uploaded the footage. Combined with anonymous leaks from within Global Wings about the grounding and the reason behind it, the story exploded. A black teen kicked from first class. Dad's call grounds plane. Screamed online headlines, hat flying while black, hashed Global Wings shame, and "Oh, justice for Jamal" trended for days. David Washington, initially hesitant to thrust Jamal further into the spotlight, realized the incident had taken on a life of its own. He decided that instead of hiding, they would control the narrative and use it to push for meaningful change. He gave a single, powerful interview to a national news outlet, calmly and eloquently, detailing what happened, emphasizing the pattern of behavior by Brenda and the airline's initial failure to address it. Jamal, though naturally introverted, agreed to speak as well, encouraged by his father. He didn't want to be a poster boy for victimhood, but he also understood the importance of his story. He spoke with a quiet dignity that impressed viewers. "I just wanted to go to my coding camp," he said in the interview. "I had a valid ticket for a seat I paid for. Being treated like a criminal or like I didn't belong just because of someone's prejudice, it's not okay. It happens to a lot of people, not just on planes. I hope airlines and other companies learn from this." The public outcry was immense. Global Wings stock took a temporary hit. Boycott threats circulated online. The Department of Transportation, prodded by David Washington's official complaint and the public pressure announced it was launching a review into Global Wing's anti-discrimination policies and its handling of passenger complaints. Facing this onslaught, Global Wing's CEO Arthur Kensington, a man usually insulated from the day-to-day operational blunders, had to step in. He issued a formal public apology far more comprehensive and sincere than anything offered initially. Global Wings has failed, Kensington stated in a televised address. We failed Jamal Washington. We failed to adequately address past issues with the involved employee, and we failed to uphold our own stated values of respect and inclusivity. For this I am profoundly sorry. An apology is not enough. We are taking immediate and concrete steps to ensure this never happens again. The concrete steps were significant largely because David Washington and his legal team were now in negotiations with Global Wings for a settlement, and systemic change was a key demand. The airline agreed to 1. Overhaul its complaint review process. An independent review board, including external civil rights experts, would be established to assess all discrimination complaints. No longer would they be easily dismissed internally. 2. Enhanced mandatory training. All 40,000 Global Wings employees, from baggage handlers to pilots to executives, would undergo a new rigorous anti-bias and de-escalation training program developed in consultation with diversity specialists. This wasn't just a one-off checkbox exercise. It was to be an ongoing part of their professional development. 3. See something, say something. Policy for employees. A new internal whistleblower policy was implemented, encouraging employees like Maria, the other first-class flight attendant, to report biased behavior from colleagues without fear of retribution. 4. Public transparency. Reports. Global Wings committed to publishing annual anonymized data on passenger complaints related to discrimination and the actions taken. 5. A substantial undisclosed settlement. A significant monetary sum was paid to Jamal Washington, most of which David announced would be placed in a trust for Jamal's education and a portion donated to civil rights organizations working against racial discrimination. Captain Eva Rostova, who had acted decisively and fairly, was quietly commended by many within and outside the airline. She became an internal advocate for the new training programs, sharing her experience as a case study in why such protocols were vital. The coding camp Jamal was heading to. He made it a few days late, but more determined than ever. The incident had shaken him, but it hadn't broken him. In fact, it had ignited something within him. He excelled at the camp, but he also found himself thinking about more than just code. He started to see how technology itself could be used to address social issues, including bias. Months bled into a year, then 2. The dramatic headlines about Flight 712 and the grounded plane dad gradually receded from the relentless churn of the 24-hour news cycle, replaced by fresher outrages and newer narratives. Yet for those directly involved, the incident wasn't a fleeting news item. It was a seismic event that had irrevocably altered the landscape of their lives and careers, casting long, persistent shadows and in some cases illuminating unexpected paths forward. Jamal Washington navigated the hallowed halls of MIT with a quiet intensity that set him apart. The coding camp had been just the beginning. Now, surrounded by some of the brightest young minds in the world, he thrived. Yet the experience on Global Wings Flight 712 had embedded itself into his psyche, a constant low hum beneath the surface of his daily life. He'd initially tried to compartmentalize it, to file it away as a bad thing that happened and was resolved. But it wasn't that simple. He found himself more attuned to the subtle currents of bias in everyday interactions, not just racial, but all forms of prejudice. He saw it in classroom discussions, in media portrayals, even in the algorithms he was learning to build. This heightened awareness was both a burden and a catalyst. His initial idea for an app to document discrimination had evolved. During a sophomore ethics in AI seminar, he presented a prototype called Alibi Witness. It wasn't just for documentation. It aimed to use geolocation and time-stamping to create verifiable though anonymized records of incidents and connect users with legal aid resources, advocacy groups, and mental health support. It also included a feature for bystanders to corroborate reports, fostering a sense of collective responsibility. The project garnered attention within the university, winning a small innovation grant. Jamal found himself reluctantly stepping into leadership roles, guiding a small team of fellow students. He still wasn't comfortable with public speaking. But when he talked about Alibi Witness, his passion was palpable. His arguments cogent and compelling, born from a place of deep personal conviction. He learned that his voice, once suppressed in Seat 1A, now had the power to design and advocate for change. His relationship with his father, David, deepened. Their conversations shifted from typical parent-teen exchanges to discussions about justice, systemic change, and the responsible use of power. David saw not just his son, but a burgeoning intellectual and a potential leader. He never pushed Jamal towards activism, but he provided quiet support and counsel-sharing insights from his own decades in the legal trenches. "Change is incremental, son," he'd often say, "but it requires persistent, unglamorous effort, and sometimes it needs a catalyst, a moment that rips the veil off complacency. Your experience was one such moment for many." Jamal, in turn, often sought his father's advice, not just on legal or ethical quandaries related to his app, but on navigating the complex emotions that still sometimes surfaced. A flash of anger when reading about a similar incident, a twinge of anxiety when boarding a plane even 2 years later. He always booked his own flights now, always double-checked his seat, always had a copy of his boarding pass screenshot on his phone, a small ritual of self-protection. David Washington continued his formidable legal work. The Global Wings case became a cornerstone example in his lectures on corporate accountability and civil rights. He spearheaded a new initiative funded by a consortium of civil rights groups, Aviation for All, aimed at monitoring and challenging discriminatory practices across the entire airline industry. They developed a confidential reporting system for airline employees and passengers and successfully lobbied for clearer DOT guidelines on handling discrimination complaints, citing the Global Wings precedent. He took on the case of a Sikh man forced to remove his turban for a random security check by a different airline, and a group of Latina women who were unfairly accused of being disruptive on another carrier. Each victory was hard-won, but the Global Wings incident had provided a powerful blueprint and a stark warning to the industry. Global Wings itself embarked on a journey of painful and expensive transformation. CEO Arthur Kensington, initially acting out of PR necessity, found himself genuinely disturbed by the depth of the problem revealed by Jamal's case and the subsequent internal audit. The enhanced mandatory training was more than just a PowerPoint presentation. It involved immersive workshops, role-playing scenarios, facilitated by external diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI consultants, and difficult, often uncomfortable conversations about unconscious bias. Captain Eva Rostova became a vocal champion of these programs, often sharing her perspective from Flight 712 without naming names, but clearly referencing the incident in pilot and crew training sessions. "Complacency is the enemy," she'd state bluntly. "Assuming it won't happen on my flight is how it happens. We are responsible for every soul on board, and that includes their dignity." The changes weren't universally embraced. Some veteran employees grumbled about PC culture gone mad and walking on eggshells. There were anonymous complaints about the training being too aggressive or making us feel like racists. The Independent Review Board faced its own challenges, navigating internal politics and ensuring its recommendations weren't diluted by middle management resistant to change. The cost of the new initiatives, the settlement with Jamal legal fees, and the initial dip in bookings from negative publicity ran into the tens of millions. However slowly, painstakingly, a shift began. The annual transparency reports, though showing an initial spike in reported incidents as people felt safer coming forward, began to show a gradual decline in substantiated cases of severe discrimination after the first 18 months. Global Wings even started receiving tentative praise from some industry watchdogs for the thoroughness of its reforms, though always with the caveat that long-term commitment was key. The airline learned that rebuilding trust was a marathon, not a sprint. Mark Henderson, the gate agent, completed his retraining a changed man. He became known for his meticulousness and his calm, fair handling of passenger issues, often volunteering to mentor new agents on de-escalation and bias awareness. And what of Brenda Hoskins? Her downfall was as complete as it was self-inflicted. The loss of her job, her pension, and her social standing was a brutal reckoning. The supermarket cashier job was a daily reminder of her fall from grace. The customers were often rude, the work monotonous, the pay barely enough to cover her rent in a small, dreary apartment far from her old life. She cycled through periods of deep depression, bitter resentment, and fleeting moments of self-awareness. Her therapist encouraged her to confront the biases that had led to her actions, to understand why she had profiled Jamal, why she felt so threatened by his presence in first class. It was a slow, agonizing process. Some days she'd lash out blaming Jamal, his powerful father, the woke mob, the airline for not having her back. On other days, a flicker of understanding would emerge, a memory of her own father's casual racism, the echo chamber of similarly prejudiced colleagues she had surrounded herself with for years. She once saw Captain Rostova in a grocery store. Their eyes met briefly. Brenda saw no judgment in the captain's gaze, only a kind of sad neutrality, which was almost worse. She turned and fled, her face burning with shame. She occasionally saw news articles about Jamal's successes at MIT, or David Washington's ongoing advocacy, each one a fresh stab of what she had wrought, not just upon them, but upon herself. Her karma wasn't a swift, dramatic bolt of lightning. It was a slow, relentless grind, a daily existence stripped of the status and authority she had once so carelessly wielded. It was the hard, unyielding consequence of choices fueled by prejudice, a life sentence of regret and diminished horizons. She had made a young man feel small and unwelcome, and in doing so had shrunk her own world to an almost unbearable smallness. The story of Flight 712. The grounded plane, the defiant father, and the shamed flight attendant became more than just an anecdote. It evolved into a case study used in business ethics courses, airline training manuals, and civil rights seminars. It served as a stark illustration of how quickly individual bias could escalate into a corporate crisis, the critical importance of accountability at all levels, and the enduring power of standing up to injustice. The echoes of that day at Hartsfield-Jackson continued to reverberate a reminder that progress often comes at a cost born from moments of confrontation that lay bare uncomfortable truths, forcing individuals and institutions alike onto the slow, arduous path toward genuine change. The lessons were hard-earned, paid for by Jamal's humiliation, David's righteous anger, Brenda's ruined career, and an airline's battered reputation. But for those willing to listen, those lessons were invaluable. And that, folks, is how one teenager's humiliation turned into a nationwide wake-up call for a major airline. Jamal's story is a powerful reminder that prejudice has no place in our skies or anywhere else. Brenda Hoskins faced the hard karma she deserved, losing her career and reputation, while Global Wings was forced into making massive changes. But the fight for equality is ongoing. What did you think of Jamal's ordeal and the airline's response? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's talk about it. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life drama and justice. Thanks for watching, and fly safe, always with respect.